about joy. And one thing that he says is that there can be joy even in the middle of sorrow. They're not necessarily two different things or separate things. Sometimes joy is quiet and peaceful, and sometimes it is lively. But joy is real, and I think that's sort of the main thing I'd say to leave with is how central joy is to apostolic zeal. To are you gonna record this?
Yeah.
All right. Wow. That's great. Sorry, I have the wrong thing. I don't remember. What page is it?
I don't know what page, but it's number 26.
What is it? Oh yeah. Want to turn off the projector?
Proclamation is joy, 26.
26. Yeah. Sorry, I have a different booklet. That reminds me. Sam printed up these. It's not very big. It's the complete set of teachings that Pope Francis did on apostolic zeal from last year. So it's about 30 pages. If you want to read more, but it's a lot of good things. There are a lot of good things here. It is really helpful for me, and I think Sam said the same, because it does reflect what we're experiencing. You want to think about it from, I think it's actually pretty providential that we just happen to be part of a community that Nikki used the word last night in her experience of training and formation, that other people from other communities are very devout, practicing, faithful Catholics refer to what she talks about in our community as an anomaly. Is that the right word? So we just have to remember that. I think that's true. I live in a different parish. I go to Mass there. Sorry?
It's not supposed to be an anomaly.
It's not supposed to be, but on the other hand, where do you start? It's so hard thinking about other parishes that we belong to, or visit, or our families go to. Things can be good, or sometimes things are kind of blah, but Holy Family is not just good. We actually have, over the last 2 years in particular, an incredible outpouring of apostolic zeal. We're actually experiencing what the Pope is talking about. That's what really got Sam's attention, despite, you could be skeptical or critical of any leader, including the Pope, but he seemed to be describing us. That's kind of the message of the weekend. So I think we can learn from him, is what I would say, because he wants to dig a little deeper, wants us all to dig a little deeper, which I think is good. Anyway, proclamation is joy. Just a few points, and then I'm going to ask you a question. I'll ask it now. And I thought it would be a good way to end, because I was thinking as we were worshiping and praying, what came to my mind is the link between joy and generosity or abundance. And some of the conversation we've had off to the side is about what I would call comes from a scarcity mindset. So if resources are limited and we're all competing for the same resources, then you start to think with a scarcity mindset, well, if I get this, then they get less. And the only way I'm going to get my share is if they get less. So it becomes competitive. It could even be ruthless. And that's the opposite of God, who is generous. And I think the fact is God is the source of joy because he's full of joy. And what I want to ask you about is, if you want to think about, I thought we could end with this, just a time in your life when God was very generous with you. Generous means you get way more than you expected. You were expecting X and you got X plus a million, whatever that was. So just think about that, if you will. I thought we could just end with, it could be something recent, it could be something from this weekend, it could be something from years ago, when you experience God's generosity. And I thought we could just do that as a closing time of thanksgiving. And I was just thinking the link between joy and generosity. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, just a little bit from the Pope, which I think is important, that you remember what the angel said, the Pope says, when Jesus was born and he appeared to the angel appeared to the shepherds, I bring you glad tidings of great joy. That's always the gospel. That's the first proclamation of Jesus. The reason, good news, a surprise, beautiful event, much more, a person. Jesus is the joy. Is this obvious to you guys? He is the joy. I hope it's obvious. It might not be obvious, but he is the joy. Okay. This is really interesting. Then he concludes the first paragraph with this typically harsh statements that are cut to the chase. It's like, either we proclaim Jesus with joy, or we do not proclaim him. That's kind of a harsh statement. It's like, either we proclaim him with joy, or we don't proclaim him. Because another way of proclaiming him, any other way of proclaiming him, is not capable of bringing the true reality of Jesus. That's kind of like he's just like, joy, or you're not actually proclaiming Jesus. I don't know, it's kind of a strong, sounds like a strong statement to me. And then he goes on, this is a theme of his papacy that goes back, Ted was reminding us, to the joy of the gospel. This is why a discontent Christian, a sad Christian, a dissatisfied, or worse still, resentful or rancorous Christian is not credible. I'm pretty rancorous, so I'm gonna watch that.
What does rancorous mean?
Kind of like angry.
Negative,
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know any of those.
Look in the mirror.
This person, I think that's what he meant. I think that is what he meant.
I was kidding.
He's like that. Yeah. Anyway, this person will talk about Jesus, but no one will believe him. I think that's true. My experience. Once someone said to me, talking about these Christians, this is, I think, an Italian expression, never heard it before, but these are po-faced Christians. Po-faced, it's not a term we use in English, but I think it means like really dour, glum. They express nothing. That's the point. Po-faced means they express nothing. Joy is essential. And then he says something I think comes out of his Jesuit formation. He's a Jesuit priest in the tradition of St. Ignatius. It is essential to keep watch over our emotions. That's kind of true. I can spiral downward into being glum or angry or resentful very easily. So watching our emotions is part of our spiritual life. This maybe links in with generosity. He says, evangelization works in gratuitousness, which just means generosity, I would say, because it comes from fullness, not from pressure. And one of the caricatures of evangelical Christians is they're trying to put pressure on people. Could someone just besides me, do you know the caricature I'm talking about? Of an evangelical Christian who is pressuring people? What's the typical thing they'll say to people? You've probably heard this or seen this.
Are you born again?
Are you born again? That's actually a good thing.
That's what I heard.
No, that's a good thing. That's actually not the pressure I mean. The pressure comes like this.
Otherwise you're going to hell.
Otherwise you're going to hell.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is the truth. And people need to hear that truth. And as I was saying, that's something that I learned from Sam. People can't hear the good news unless they hear the bad news. They can't know the good news. There is bad news. It's real. But if it becomes like a pressure tactic, then that's not generosity. That's not gratuitous. That's not joy. Okay, that's basically it. He says the gospel is not an ideology. Ideologies are cold. The gospel is a proclamation of joy. I love this line. I don't know if you know what I mean when he says ideology. It means like you have a system of thought that's more important than reality. You just keep on thinking that in that system. You try to impose it on reality, but reality is never going to line up in any system of thought. Here's the line. Ideologies do not know how to smile. I love that line. And there are a lot of ideologies out there, including in the Catholic Church. Ideologies do not know how to smile. The gospel is a smile. Sam?
What's an example of an ideology that a Catholic might have?
Well, one you referred to in one of the previous catechesis would be focusing so much on the conduct of the Mass or the liturgy that you start to think of that phenomenon, a human thing that we do, as if God wasn't there anymore. But the whole point of worshiping God in the Mass, the Eucharist, and liturgy is God's presence is the first thing, not us. But you start to focus so much on being precise, on having really beautiful aesthetics, whether it's music or church decoration. Those are all good things, but they can easily become a substitute for the living God who is meant to be the center of worship. That's an example of an ideology that, and a whole way of thinking. For example, things were way better in the 1940s or 1950s, often said by people who are grandchildren, people from that time, like that's before my time, as if they could like project back a time they didn't live through and say, it must have been better then and we should go back to what it was like then. And they have this like, almost like they watch old black and white TV shows and said, yeah, that's what life was like back then. Nobody who's lived through that's stupid. Sorry, because they lack experience. But an ideology would say, well, we had something wonderful then, and we have to go back there. And that's something he warns about. The Holy Spirit that's why proclamation is for today. So an ideology would substitute today. It's, I don't want to live in today. I want to recreate something that I imagine in my 20s or 30s now in 2024 was probably true 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 years ago, well before my parents even probably were born, right? Does that make sense? That's an ideology.
Would you call the pro-life movement an ideology?
I think the pro-life movement has an ideological side.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you know if you're like sort of if you're sort of like within the gospel or if you're in an ideology? How do you know which is which?
If you're smiling,
Oh, okay.
I think.
I really struggled when he started talking against ideologies. I really struggled to understand what he was talking about.
Yeah, so
What's bad about an ideology? Because Christianity contains an ideology.
it could.
Right? So, but he's using it in a sense of fundamentalism. I
A
think.
system of thought that you're going to adhere to no matter what reality
That's
is.
right.
So
Yeah.
I like the way you mentioned with pro-life movement. I remember actually talking to you guys, Ted and Christine, years ago, about we had stopped taking a pro-life newspaper because we found when it came in, we read it, it was very dispiriting and discouraging. It was very doom and gloom and pessimistic. Obviously, abortion is horrible, but nonetheless, when we think of the God of life and the source of all life, the first thing should be joy. It should leave us uplifted and hopeful. Even I put myself on 11 down on that chart, but that's not because I don't have hope. I have a lot of hope. Like the light shines brighter in the dark times. But we stopped taking that newspaper, and there's a lot of stuff on social media by people who are trying to adhere to what they think of as the Catholic faith, but it ends up being very like rancorous and sad or pessimistic. Not just like they see the evil, which we all need to see. That is part of the reality of the world we're living in. I don't want to be Pollyannish by any means, but an ideology would say, we've got a system of thought to figure that out, and all we have to do is apply it. Another example I would say is, I know a little bit about perhaps one of the greatest thinkers in the Catholic Church, St. Thomas Aquinas. But there are people who invoke him who know much less than I do, who think that he's providing answers for everything. And if you know anything about St. Thomas, you know that in the first place, he was in awe of the God we worship, of Father, Son, and Spirit. And he knew that his incredible intellectual efforts, volumes and volumes of philosophy and theology, were an act of worship, because he was given a gift by God, but not a complete system. And they want to reduce St. Thomas to like, okay, we have all these conclusions, and all we have to do is now apply them, which is never the way St. Thomas worked. A good example from St. Thomas, why he is not ideological, is St. Thomas took very seriously and learned from pagan, Muslim, and Jewish thinkers. He incorporated their thought into his thought when he's reflecting upon the God we know through the Bible as Christians. But he said we can learn, and he did, from all these other people with their ultimately false views, but still some revealed truth are present in other very different and wrong faiths and philosophies and so on, but we can still learn from them. And that's an ideology would say you can't learn from people who disagree with you. So that's another, like the way St. Thomas is used, for instance.
I think it's an important thing. Could we also say that one of the characteristics of openness, which hope is contrasting with an ideological approach, is humility. Like one of the, you think about I'm just thinking about if I read Life's Like News, for instance, it's like we have all the answers. It lacks humility.
Sure.
If I'm thinking, people who are really stuck on the liturgy being performed a certain way, the Latin, or whatever. It's like we have the answer. It lacks sort of the humble knowledge that when we come before the Lord, we don't know anything. We're really just opening ourselves up to the Holy Spirit and letting ourselves be led in new directions. And that goes along with the creativity you talked about.
Creativity and simplicity.
Yes.
Which is a kind of humility, the simplicity aspect. And of course, I should say this because I didn't yet. There are certainly a lot of ideologies that are on the left or progressive that he points out. I mean, he says many times, as Catholics, we're not conservative, we're not progressive. And we should be people who make sense to neither conservative nor progressive people because, for example, we have a calling to people who are poor because that's the way Jesus is. That's who he is, and that's that's the kind of kingdom he came to bring about on this earth. Well, that really changes our view of society and reality. That can sound very progressive, but it's not. Mm-hmm. And we are very pro-life as a community, and the Pope is very clear about that. Another example, gender ideology is something the Pope refers to as an ideology. The idea that we can come up with a system of thought that can help people, kind of make people think, well, reality is not real anymore, and that he just talks about how that's been used to harm people. Even though, and at the same time, that's why it's not ideological. Even his response to that, as critical as he is he still wants to engage with and spend time with people who live out their identities in that world. So an ideological person resists contact with people who are on the outside of their ideology. And the gospel is exactly for people who are visibly on the outside, but in their hearts are still part of who we are. We can't, in other words, ideology will dismiss a whole category of people as too conservative or too progressive. We don't dismiss anybody. And there's a humility in that because we think, as I said of St. Thomas, that we can learn from everybody, even people who are wrong.
Yeah, Pope Francis was very clear about gender ideology and then joyfully invited large groups of them to come for dinner at the Vatican, of people that struggle with it. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, it's not an ideology because the joy and the acceptance and the openness is there as well.
Yeah.
Right? Even though he's been very clear about it, to the dismay of the progressives, he's been very clear about it.
The openness to the people.
Yes.
Yes.
That you can belong here.
Yeah.
And you're ours. We'll care about you.
Yeah.
At the same time as being really clear about the ideology. So
he insists that there's a place for everyone in the church.
Yeah.
Without softening our doctrinal truths.
Right.
He insists that we find a way to embrace everyone.
Yeah.
And that's what's causing a lot of consternation.
Something that, just for the recording that we were discussing, is Ted used a phrase that Sam used yesterday in his presentation, which I thought was very interesting. You said, I used to believe that I had to water down the faith, but now?
Something about trust.
Trusting relationships.
You can be totally honest.
I can be totally honest about almost anything if there's trust present.
Right. So that's the difference between, that's what ideology says. Well, we'll have to water it down to suit the prevailing ideology. And that's not what Pope Francis does. And Sam was talking about this, that we can and need to be totally honest within a trusting relationship. When there's trust, be totally honest. And often people, in Sam's experience, I know my experience for sure, maybe yours, when people trust you, they ask you all kinds of weird, I see Nikki nodding because we've talked about this, people she knows, her colleagues, her peers, they're asking her about all kinds of things, really odd seeming life things that are happening in their lives, choices they're making, ways they're doing things. but because they trust her. And I'm just going to say that. And you can be honest with that, even though it's kind of awkward, right? That's the opposite of ideology. Maybe in ideology, you stop seeing the people and you just sort of see a system.
I think that's kind of what Pope Francis is saying here, because he says ideologies don't smile.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah, yeah.
He's talking about, he's contrasting ideologies with Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus the person, ideology, a thought process.
A system of thought. It's
Yeah.
the idea of a system. He's very concerned that we don't worship a system. Truth for us is not a system. We can have systematic explanations of the truth, like the Catechism, but if you read the Catechism, which I have, it's actually very much like the Bible, which it draws upon a lot, pointing to the reality of the living God, Father, Son, and Spirit, which is obviously a mystery that transcends even the best we have of our way of thinking. We do have a way of thinking, but it's not a system.
So that what you were saying there about trust in people, like if
Yeah.
I trust Nikki and then
Yeah.
follow her stuff, or just using it as an example, what does that look like if you don't trust, like, I'll just use for example, on Wednesday, I'm supposed to be doing my testimony, and I'll be honest, 93% of those people that are gonna be there, I do not trust.
Yeah.
Like, I have no, and that's been but I just keep coming back to, do I trust God?
Yeah.
Mm.
That is really
and
important.
that's what's like, so, cause it was nice talking to Cody, cause he said he was wanted to bail too, and I've been
Yeah.
like, I really wanna bail, I really
Yeah.
wanna bail.
Yeah.
Because of that trust in people, to tell things about myself, I trust certain people,
Yeah.
but anyways.
I do want, that's
so
quite
that
important.
comes down to, is like,
Yeah.
do we always have to trust in the people, or do we trust in God to bring us to people that, what
Yeah.
they do with that information, if they wanna go gossip or whatnot, it's on them,
Right.
but the message was still delivered.
I do want to talk about, so when we are in conversations, as we often are with people, I think it's important that we're personal and that we have a smile which is a sign of joy, right? But I like the distinction, a Christian pastor, I listened to his stuff online, which is quite helpful. He said, we should always be honest, but we should measure how open we are depending on the situation we're in. Like with my wife, I can be completely open about almost everything. Not everything, because I'm not perfect, but I can be really open about almost everything with my wife. When I preach, I'm talking before a group of people, even at Unify, I make reference to certain things from my family, my experience, but I limit the openness because there's a bunch of people there. I don't know them, some of them. So I limit the openness, especially when I'm addressing a group of people. That is kind of important.
And when we're talking about like when we establish trust, then we can be honest with people. I think the context is more so like, not that we expect everybody else to be trustworthy, but that we should build ourselves into people that we are trustworthy people, that other people can trust us because we've shown them that we are trustworthy, so that if we have to, like, if there's situations where we have to speak like an uncomfortable truth, that they trust, like, and the example that I was thinking of actually is somebody else who, like, when we talk about differences in our beliefs, someone has said to me before, like, well, I know that you are a good person and that you are kind, so when you're saying these things, I know it's coming from a good place.
Yeah.
That's more like what I'm thinking about in terms of trust. That is like, you, like, through our witness, like, in how we live out our lives, we show that we are trustworthy people, so that when we talk about Jesus, people believe us because they know it's like consistent with how we act and what we, like what we say and what we do. That he said that in one of these other things, that you have to, like, you believe and you proclaim and you live, and all of those should be together. That's what makes us trustworthy, so that we can say things and people believe us because we've established trust. Not that we just put our trust in whomever, regardless of how trustworthy
Even in the
they
church,
are.
we have to be guarded at times.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
Because it's just appropriate. People don't need to know the things that I share with my close friends, with my wife, with my kids in the same way. But I might refer to, for instance, I struggled as a father at times. I struggled with being patient. I wasn't always good at being patient with my kids. I'll say that much. I'm not going to go into details in with a congregation full of people. Does that make sense? So when you are asked to give a testimony and you're willing to do that, that's a gift that you're willing to offer the rest of us. What each of us does with that gift is up to us. So I do think being guarded is good.
Yeah.
Is good in that circumstance. It's a room full of people you mostly don't know, and therefore you shouldn't just trust, right? But more like I think, and that I think testimony is very much at the heart of proclaiming the gospel. Is like we do have to share some of our experience with people, and do so in ways that are prudent. I love the word prudent, but it means that we're taking the right. Prudence means taking the right risks. That's what St. Thomas teaches.
And even to touch base with what you said about being trustworthy, even if you are trustworthy, like people trusted you to say what you're saying, a lot of people you're meeting can only judge by two things. When you meet someone, whatever they're doing, you can go by two things: who you know they are or who you are. So if I don't know you and you're doing something, I could just take my own internalization and say, well,
That's right.
in that situation, I would do this.
Yeah.
So, it's just, I don't know.
So think.
Again, I just go back to I trust God.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day,
Sure.
He puts me places that
Yeah.
I need to be for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So I have to overcome all of that.
Can I?
Move forward, but it's a struggle.
I would agree with you, but I would also add this. For me, in experience of both ends of it, for me with other people with me, is trust takes time. And that's okay. Because I need to see over time in different situations because I see a lot of Sam's, like over time I've seen lots of different situations. Sometimes he's his best self, sometimes he's not, like the rest of us. So in some ways, when you see someone not at their best self, you really get to know them. That's why families are so exciting and often horrible, because you see people at their lowest points. No, I'm not kidding. I'm not being funny.
No, it's
Yeah. But it's real. I think it's over time. At the same time, God is a God of second chances. He's always going to give us a second chance, and He asks us to be ready for that. Not like just, anyway. We're talking a lot about specifically trust, but it is really important in everything we're doing here. It's about trust. Just a little bit more about joy. When we're down, so he mentions a story that's kind of well known to some of us, but not to everybody. It's after he died, and the day he rose from the dead, but they didn't know he'd risen from the dead yet. Two of them were leaving, Luke chapter 24, and then he shows up and they don't know it's him. The transformation that takes place when you encounter Jesus is, even if you didn't know He was walking with you, and He was walking with you, later on you say, were not our hearts burning with joy? And what was He doing, which is actually kind of important? The Pope doesn't mention this, I want to mention is, He was opening up the scriptures to them. There's a joy to encounter Jesus. There's a specific joy that He wants us to have to encounter Him through the scriptures. And actually, something that Pope Francis says in other places is that everybody should carry around a copy of at least one of the Gospels or the New Testament and look at it frequently, because one way we get to know Jesus as a person, a human person, is by reading about Him, because those are inspired words of eyewitness testimonies to Him. The Pope just says that's a continual source of renewal for us. Like every day, he wants us to read about Jesus in the Gospel, the one we can trust no matter what. Yeah. So the point is that the encounter with Jesus transforms when we're down and sad and pessimistic to joy over and over again. And we need that over and over again. This is precisely the time, even though this is, as he refers to it, a fast-paced, confused environment, and we might feel ready to renounce the proclamation of the gospel because it seems like no one's going to pay attention, no one cares. That's the temptation. The temptation, he says, is the idea of letting, quote-unquote, others go their own way. He refers to that as a temptation we have. Just let the others just go their own way. Instead, he said, this is precisely the time to return to the gospel, to discover Jesus is, in quotes, forever young, and a constant source of newness. That's the second chances that we all need, that newness. Yeah, I'm almost at the end here. Even the civilization of programmed unbelief and institutionalized secularity, meaning they're pushing God more and more off to one side. They just are. Like all kinds of institutions, locally, nationally, globally, it just keeps happening. This is the civilization that needs Jesus more than ever. This is the right moment for the proclamation of Jesus. And I'm going to end with a quote. Therefore, I would like to say again to everyone, the joy of the gospel fills the hearts and lives of all who encounter Jesus. Those who accept his offer of salvation are set free from sin, sorrow, inner emptiness, and loneliness. With Christ, joy is constantly born anew. That's the end of my talk. So I'm just going to ask if we just take a moment, just think of a time when God was very generous with you. And I'm thinking that'd be like a good wrap up for our time together. Just recently, this weekend, or in the past. Just a time that God was very generous with you. Is that okay? Just take a couple minutes and then we'll just share those spontaneously. Any other questions, though I should say that, or comments? I'm glad Ted and Stephanie, you guys asked what you did.